Welcome, everyone. We got some new faces here today because it's from the IFMC. Brian, wonderful. Thank you very much. So, my name is Steven. If you don't know me, I am the tabletop composer. I'm a professional composer for media, film, and stage. And I am also a former therapist. That's what most of my training was. And so I have a very unique perspective on portraying emotions with music, and that's what I'm going to be teaching you today. The goal is by the end of this very brief live stream, you will have everything you need to portray literally any emotion you can possibly think of. The only limitations are going to be your imagination and your ability to apply the models and tools I teach you today. As we do this live stream, feel free to pop questions into the comments, all right? Questions, ideas, suggestions, and no, they do not have to be related to the class material. After the live stream, I will be uploading this PDF as a link underneath this stream, so anybody who wants to come back and take the notes, get a reminder of all the material we covered, you can find it all here after the stream in the description of the video as a link. We're good? Everybody good? All right, let's get started. So, emotions and music are built around a single, simple premise. All right? If you can describe your emotion effectively, then you can describe the music that will portray it. Now, when I say describe effectively, I mean almost kind of clinical. The method we're going to take is originally adapted from a psychometric tool. That is a tool used in psychology called the circumplex model of affect. The CMA for short. Do you need to know that? No, you don't. Instead, all you need to know is there are three elements of music. All right, we have valence, we have size, and we have movement/energy. If you can describe these three things on your emotion, it will give you a description of the precise musical qualities necessary to portray that emotion. No templates necessary, no breakdowns. You don't have to pay expensive course fees to find out how to write love themes, to write sad themes, to write adventure themes. You don't need to learn any of that. You just need to learn how to describe emotions. Now, valence. This is the tricky one that lots of people don't seem to understand, recognize. It's a weird term. Valence describes how dark or bright an emotion feels. You can think of negative to positive. Now, this is an entire spectrum, all right? So, for example, sadness. There are multiple types of sadness. All right, the disappointment of going to the fridge and seeing that your roommate ate your last waffle or I don't know, something, that's unfortunate, but it's not as dark as finding out you just flunked a class and you're gonna get kicked out of your program and now your dreams are crumbling all around you, right? Different kinds of emotions, different levels of darkness. Valence, a little question, something I like to share. If you want to describe whether an emotion is dark or bright, ask yourself, is this an emotion I would want my loved ones to experience? If no, it's probably a dark emotion. Sadness, grief, anger. If yes, it's probably a bright emotion. And if it's complicated, it's probably a mix of the two, which, yes, that can happen. There are lots of dark sounds you can create. A minor to E minor, a very dark sound. You can take that same chord progression and make it major. A minor to E major. Suddenly it sounds much brighter. And don't worry, we'll get into tools and stuff for controlling valence. Right now, I want to just describe the tools first. To the land of promise, does the center of the valence point toward emptiness, void of negative or positive energy? The center points towards kind of complicated, like neutral ground. So we've got far left, if you think about the CMA as like 4 points on a compass. To the west, you have very dark emotions. nice and minor. Minor colors are used, very useful. On the opposite end, you have very bright sounds. Like I said, A major and E major. Now what happens if you're somewhere in the middle and you have like this mix? Usually that's where kind of you've got nostalgia, things like ambiguity, emotions that are like bittersweet, somewhere in the middle. And then you can use things like these beautiful little seventh chords, which help create this wider, much rich color. And again, don't worry about the specifics. We're gonna get into strategies. I will tackle specific strategies for every single one of these. I would never leave you hanging like that, all right? The whole point is for this to be an entirely inclusive, like everything kind of course, all right? 7 Tiers of Hope. Oh, good evening, my friends. Welcome, 7 Tiers. So, with Valence, you describe how bright an emotion feels, negative to positive. All right, you wanna ask yourself, is this a dark emotion? Is it a bright emotion? Is it some kind of mix in between the two? Valence is usually where harmony lives. Lots of people get confused thinking that emotion lives in harmony. Yeah, it's part of the equation, but no, it's not all of it. Because next we have size. Size refers to how overwhelming an emotion is. Something very sweet, very soft, something that's not very overwhelming, can be very intimate. You can be, let's do some negative examples. Annoyance. If you are annoyed, you can be, it's not that overwhelming. You can be annoyed, it's gonna piss you off a little bit, and you're gonna move on a bit, you're fine. But if you are outraged, you can still get your homework done or get your job done if you're annoyed. If you are outraged, you are not going to be able to focus. All right? So the question you ask yourself, could I continue on with my daily tasks while experiencing this emotion? Or would it be overwhelming? And this has a lot to do with how large the emotion feels. Like I said, is this a very small passing comment? Someone complimented your haircut. Awesome, that's great. You feel good about that? Or did you just win the Mega Millions lottery? And suddenly that task your boss gave you doesn't seem quite as important anymore, right? These are very simple things. And we're not trying to find definitive numbers. If you do want to find definitive numbers, you're kind of a person that works very well with like scales and equations and stuff. I do have a class on my website that contains all of that, but you don't really need it. This model will work perfectly fine. The last one, movement and energy, is how physically expressive and or energizing an emotion is. When you are excited, that gives you energy. You dance, you clap your hands, you rub your hands together, you do whatever you gotta do to like kind of express how happy you are with excitement. When you are very sad or depressed, it's like it robs that energy from you. Suddenly, you just wanna slump in your chair, you don't wanna do anything, you wanna stay in bed all day, and it feels like it is sapping energy from you. To determine, as another little useful tool for figuring out what the movement or energy of an emotion is, ask yourself, typo, how easy would it be to tell if a stranger was feeling this emotion just from watching their body language? And if none of these, I should say, none of these questions are written in stone. These are not the only way you can answer these. All of this is open up to interpretation. These are just the questions I personally tend to gravitate towards when I'm trying to figure this out. So let's take an example, all right? Sadness. What type of sadness can we work with today? Anyone got a suggestion? Haha, Joshua, pet died, yes. Wonderful example, tragedy and grief. With this, we wanna go through each of these, all right? Tragedy and grief. How would you describe this? Valence, remember how positive or negative this is? This is a pretty dark, it's a dark and negative emotion. If you want, you can get more detailed than that. You can get less detailed. You can just go dark. These tools aren't there to be, this isn't homework. This is a guideline. This is a framework to structure your thoughts Make it your own, answer it how you want. But for me personally, I find erring on the side of more details than less helps a lot. Sighs. How overwhelming is grief? So Joshua said pet died. All right, that's pretty overwhelming. All right, especially with how, depending on how close you were to the animal, how long you'd had that animal in your life, what kind of role they played for like emotional or regulation, just if they were a very dearly loved, beloved pet. I saw this really sad yet inspiring video on Instagram recently about a gentleman who turned his life around because his dog Lucky was always his number one cheerleader. That even when he felt like he couldn't go on, he always had that dog that was always happy to see him. She inspired him to turn his life around, and just as he started getting better health, taking care of himself, she passed away. And just that kind of grief would be overwhelming. So we'll say this is an overwhelming emotion, massive in size and scale. Last one, movement/energy. How physically expressive. This is where it comes up to interpretation. This is where the real beauty of this model works. In its simplicity, it's open to all kinds of interpretation. Tragedy and grief can be displayed so differently. You could have a character on screen who's doing the whole stoic thing. Their life is coming crashing down around them, and yet there's like not even a manly tear down the cheek or something. And they're just trying to bottle it up, squeeze it in. You could have the very stereotypical like gnashing and wailing of teeth, character ripping at their hair, ripping at their clothes. Why? Thunderstorm, rain coming down, all that jazz. This is all about describing the emotion you want to portray. This is not about finding a template. This is not about finding an objective descriptor of an emotion. This is, hey, this is the scene I was given. This is the story I'm working with. What is happening in this story? So let's say this is relatively low energy. All right, this is overwhelming grief. The character is crying, but they're not wailing and gnashing their teeth. They're not beating their breasts in anger. There's not all this dramatic Shakespearean kind of portrayal of emotion. What we have now that we've answered this is we have a description of our music. If we want to, we have described our emotion. If we want to describe our music, it's the same thing. Our music needs to sound dark. Our music needs to feel large. Our music needs to feel relatively low energy. If you can write dark, large, somewhat low energy music, you'll have tragic, grief-stricken music. You'll have a beautifully emotional, impactful score. This is going to work every single time. Now, the thing is, this isn't the only way to portray emotions in music. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying this is the scientific approach and it's the only thing that works. Obviously, it's not the only thing that's going to work, but this is something that will work every single time. There are always ways to go counter to this description. For example, one very famous example being the explosion scene in Sherlock Holmes, the score done by Hans Zimmer. There's a scene, explosions everywhere. We think some of the characters might die. And yet instead of this massive sound, we have something very intimate. This isn't about finding an objective description. This is about ordering your thoughts and describing what impact you want to have. Now, it's one thing to have a description of emotion, and we will do a demonstration of this. As we come up with this live, after this, you'll be shocked at how fast we can write this, how quickly we can write music that feels emotionally impactful. I recommend a method I like to call the 9 parameters approach to music. All right, this is something I have taught extensively on my channel, something I have taught extensively in, where is it? My textbook has an entire chapter dedicated to this. This is something I believe I touch on briefly in the IFMC's class on film scoring. This is an approach I cannot champion enough to composing. When you stop and think of something as broad as, hey, how do I write a theme for this character? That can be overwhelming. There are so many different directions you can go in. So rather than try to think of the big picture right away, you might have ideas. If you have ideas, write them down. Awesome, fantastic. But if you are struggling with writer's block, break music down into its 9 fundamental parameters and brainstorm how each one can contribute to the personality or vibe you're trying to create. And those parameters are tempo, timbre, texture, which is another word for the number and types of layers used in your music, rhythm, register, dynamics, harmony, melody, or you can think of it as pitch, and number 9, articulation. Obviously, there's going to be some overlap between each of these. But if I were to tell you, all right, music that portrays grief, how do we write music, a theme that sounds dark, large, and relatively low energy? Well, you can now start brainstorming. Suddenly, rather than being paralyzed with choice paralysis, it narrows your focus. It forces you to address each parameter of your music one at a time. So let's do this. We need to come up with ideas. If you have ideas, pop them in the comments. I'd love to hear them. We need to write a very tragic, grief-stricken theme. All right? We need to brainstorm strategies. How do we make our music sound dark? Let's start with that first. So timbre, tempo, anything to make it sound dark? Nothing comes to mind. Timbre, let's do dark equals use lower registers. Even something where you can go beyond typical things. I don't know. Use the Metropolis ARC libraries. They have a nice dark quality. A lot of the Metropolis ARC qualities, which this was loaded ahead of time just because I was going to do it anyway, but I didn't realize we'd use it. A lot of Metropolis ARC, especially Metropolis ARC 2, emphasizes like those lower registers. Very rich, dark quality. Obviously, you don't have to think that deep. This isn't about tackling everything. We need dark. All right, use low registers. I'm gonna use the Metropolis ARC libraries. They have a nice dark quality. Anything else? Register. Again, dark. Emphasize lower registers. So I'm gonna make sure that I definitely have a baseline. Harmony. Dark, we can do minor, chords, and keys. That's about it. So I'm gonna give some tips. Tips. Valence. Harmony and timbre are your best friends. Size. Dynamics. Registers. Texture. We'll say, and texture are your best friends. And then energy/movement. Rhythm, tempo, articulation, and texture are your best friends. All right? These are not rules. These are just personal experience. That when all else fails, when you come back to these notes and you download them, you're always like, all right, I'm struggling a little bit. Let's go with Valence first. Valence, all right, let's brainstorm how I can use harmony and timbre. It doesn't have to be complex. It doesn't have to be new. It doesn't have to be unique. It doesn't have to be genius. We want to make music that is emotionally available to your audience. Yeah, that can be awesome when you do brilliant stuff. I'm not saying don't do really cool, avant-garde, strange things. I'm not saying don't push the envelope. What I'm saying is don't be afraid to rely on some simple ideas. Simplicity communicates, all right? It's very useful. So now we gotta do size, large. Let's see if anybody's got some ideas. Which of the 9 parameters do you focus on the least usually? Hungry, hungry bee. Good question. I would say personally, the ones I tend to use the least would probably be articulation and dynamics. Those are the ones where I don't usually have great ideas. The ones where I usually have my best ideas are harmony, texture, and melody. those are things I have spent a lot of time. I love harmony. Anyone who's been around the channel for a while, I've done so many harmony playlists. I've done so many harmony videos. I love creating rich, beautiful harmonic backgrounds. I am also a very talented melodist. Or I won't say talent, I'm a very skilled melodist. I am fantastic at whipping out a tune, which reminds me, and texture, I love coming up with, I find texture is my best friend for storytelling. I love assigning different layers in my music to different elements of a story. But in terms of harmony and melody, if you would like to learn my approach, Indie Film Music Contest, free class. I partnered with the Indie Film Music. I am very passionate about providing free music education because I myself was forced to drop out of music school because I couldn't afford the tuition. And I remember just being so hurt and angry about the apathy from my school, how no one cared. None of the administration, at least, none of the administration seemed to care that I couldn't continue because I couldn't afford to pay 10 grand a month. So now I have a vendetta against music schools. I try to make lots of stuff free. This free class, less than an hour, will cure writer's block for you forever. That's my claim. My claim is this class, you will never struggle to write another melody again. You will never struggle to come up with a chord progression again. You will never struggle to come up with a bass line again. This is my method. I have spent over 7,200 hours working as a professional composer, logged just writing music, and I am neurodivergent. I freaking love music theory. It is my fixation. And so this class combines all of that. I am very good at summarizing information and creating systems. That's what the class is all about. 100% free, zero commitment. You don't have to pay cards or anything. So I do want to shout out to the Indie Film Music Contest for being part of this vision with me, for partnering with me to help share that and host it. If you haven't, go check it out. Hey, Brian says it's an effective course. Thank you, Brian. I appreciate that. So where were we? Dark, we got some ideas. Let's get some large ideas. What are we gonna do to create a large quality? We could do large quality. Large, we can say start with a simple texture and then build into more and more layers. Contrary to what you might think, if you want a big sound, one of the best ways to get it is to start off small. Start off small, and then you have a reference point. So that when you have this solo flute or violin playing an idea, and then bam, the whole orchestra comes in, suddenly it feels even larger. Or the opposite, sometimes when you start off really large and you want it to sound big again, eventually there's not much else you can go. So you artificially give yourself room by pulling it down. Give it to just a few voices, and then boom, you come back in. John Williams does that all the time. John Williams has a very predictable A-B-A structure for all of his heroic themes. Superman, Indiana Jones, even some of the stuff in Star Wars. Big bombastic fanfare, soft, intimate, lyrical B section, big bombastic fanfare again. And it's very effective. There's a reason why he uses it so often. There's a reason why so many composers use that so often, is because it's effective. So large, let's do register. Large equals use multiple octaves, double most layers. All right, dynamics, that's an easy one. Large equals use large dynamics or loud dynamics. Maybe start soft, then get huge. All right, harmony, dark keys and chords. We don't need to do too much for size. Melody, pitch, don't need any of that. Last one. And again, ideally you would spend significantly more time on this. Last year I did a soundtrack for a dance troupe in New York. And I was supposed to compose I did compose a 6-minute piece of music that was supposed to epitomize the experience of loneliness. I spent about 2 weeks on this stage of exploring the emotion, exploring the context of the story, exploring my own personal experiences with grief and loneliness and the feelings of isolation. So about 2 weeks brainstorming, journaling, coming up with all that. You don't need to do that. But when I had done this and I'd done all this, it took me 1 hour to sketch the whole thing. And they loved it so much that they hired me for more music after that. So yeah, take your time with this. Let's see here. So we want movement, tempo. Low energy equals slower tempo. Say rhythm probably does that. Low energy equals longer note values. Let's do... I think that's about it. That's good enough. We'll call that good enough. I'm going to create some space here. We now have a description of our music. We're going to create a very simple idea now. Let's sketch this. Piano. Let's swap our tempo to about, let's say 75. Not super fast, not super slow. Stretch this out. We need, let's focus on dark. Usually for me, if you've taken that free class, you understand that my method is I almost always start with the harmony first. Let's keep it super simple. If you've also taken that class, you know what I am creating now is called an absolute progression. An absolute progression is an idea where I take just 2 chords. This is very, very common in film music. I'll explain in a moment. Let's do... All right. An absolute progression says, hey, I have 2 chords that I really like. So rather than mess around with a bunch of different keys, a bunch of different options and stuff, I'm just going to repeat it. I'll use a couple different inversions, so it's not going to voice lead very pretty, but I'm just going to repeat it over and over again until I feel like I'm ready to end the phrase. Then I'm just going to pick a cadence, a way to end it. And so when you do that, it's very common in film music, because if you ever want a free resource, look up chords and emotions. Watch this, super cool. Pow, I am the top result. Click on this, chords and emotions, and I have a chart completely free. Venus Theory on YouTube actually uses this chart, which was really, really cool. I had an awesome chat with him. This chart right here, it breaks down different chord relationships, meaning combinations of 2 chords that have very specific emotional ties. And how you can apply those in your own music. It's from a branch of music theory called Neo-Romanian theory. Very fun to work with. But for now, we have a very simple... and then it loops really well. The cool thing about any chord progressions is as long as you have a pattern to establish the first chunk of it, and then you have a cadence, a way to end it, you're good. If you want to learn more about that, again, check out the free class with the Indie Film Music Contest. Less than an hour of your time, you will master this. You will never... This, as well as multiple other patterns and strategies. But we have our sketch. We have our valence taken care of. I'm going to say, to create our feeling of grief, we want low movement, and I want to get bigger and bigger and bigger until in the second half, in the repeat, boom, we just hit this huge wall. So let's focus on creating the massive wall of music first. I personally like to sketch in a piano. All right? For me, it allows me to take my ear off of the instruments. It allows me to focus on the structure of the idea itself. So let's create a bass line. That's our chords. We got our valence figured out. Little tip. Anytime you're arranging for strings, I have a bunch of string libraries open already, so I'm just going to do strings only. Take your chord progression, raise it an octave, take the middle voice, drop it down an octave, instant string arrangement. Super simple. You guys want to see something really cool? This is really simple. This is really stupid, right? This is nothing crazy. This is nothing massive. And yet we're about to make this sound tremendously huge. I will show you how. The secret to making something sound massive, like I said, is to build into it. So we'll say, let's do this one up here, build some space. All we're gonna do, start very simple. We'll say our first, that, we're gonna start off and gradually build into different areas. Say, delete that. So we'll say, we'll actually add that E back in. 2 bars, just soft. And we'll just keep adding. We'll add our bass line. Go down there. We're going to take our valence. We're going to lower the velocity, give a little thing. This is going to be very, very simple. We're going to hear how it already starts to impact in just the piano sketch as it gets bigger and more dramatic. Then we can get this to hit a little harder. At the repeat, we'll increase the velocity a little bit. We can actually lengthen this a little bit. Going to the B. So we're using the entire chord. There we go. It's getting there. It's getting there. So now, last thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take this bass line and to add just a little bit of movement. We don't want too much, but if we take this little bass line, drop it down, all I'm going to do is add some movement. So what I'm hitting is I'm clicking the Alt button. I'm clicking the Alt button with the scissor tool, and it chops the entire bar into whatever size I want it to. And are there better arrangements? Obviously. But this will do nicely. Right? Not quite there yet, but we can hear the feeling of it. Let's start adding the instruments. pure, simple emotion. This will work every single time. Emotions and music are so intimately linked because they are described using the same basic models. We understand our experiences of emotion across these three elements. Emotions can be described on a whole range of dark to bright. They can be described as a massive range of intimate and barely perceptible, all the way to overwhelmingly intense. And they have this unique ability to give us energy or take it. And music can match every single one of those stack for stack. All right, every single one. So, hopefully, that was a fun little demonstration. Hopefully, you feel empowered to go and take on the day. Because one last thing I will say is none of these are static. One of the cool things about arranging music is figuring out, all right, how does your valence need to change? Where does it need to get darker? Where does it need to get brighter? And what tools will you use to do that? Even like in this one, we started off very small, very intimate, and then we built up. These can all develop across time. They're musical parameters, of course they can. All right, it's wonderful. And I geek out about this so much. So thank you very much to everyone who stopped by. I hope this is helpful. Again, I will add the link to the notes from this stream to the description of this stream, so anyone who comes by later can just download it there. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, my friends. I will see you all next week. All right, bye-bye.